Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lauren Sobat, and I'm joining you from Jabuktuk, colonially known as Halifax, in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I have the pleasure of introducing my Pathy Fellowship cohort member and friend, Nayaelah Siddiqui, as she walks us through the brilliant work she has undertaken in the past year and beyond. Nayaelah is a University of Ottawa grad with an honors Bachelor of Commerce in International Management. Over the course of her studies, she was involved in the creation of a grassroots group in Ottawa called EmpowerM. EmpowerM brings together women of color from diverse backgrounds to connect with each other and achieve their personal and professional goals. Since 2013, Nayaelah and her team have built a safer community for women of color where they are not only heard, but are also celebrated for who they are. Nayaelah's fellowship has focused on researching, developing, and piloting a model and framework for a sustainable leadership and mentorship program for women of color ages 18 and up in Ottawa. Through this mentorship programming, called Our Way Forward, women of color are paired with other women of color of similar lived experiences to learn how to navigate barriers, build a network, and gain confidence in living their most authentic lives. Over the course of this year, they were able to foster this community for 30 women across Canada. It doesn't take more than a few minutes after meeting Nayaelah to know that she is a person deeply dedicated to making the world a better place. She radiates strength and gentleness, empathy and resilience, loyalty and kindness, and always comes to the table with a curious mind. She is truly a unique change maker that my cohort and I have had the honor of getting to know over the past year. And most importantly, she makes a mean masala chai. Now for some housekeeping. Nayaelah's having some issues with her webcam today, but you'll be able to hear her just fine. And during Nayaelah's presentation, we asked you to leave questions and make comments in the comment section of Zoom or the Facebook live stream. Our cohort member, Ben, will be moderating a 15 to 20 minute Q&A. Take it away, Nayaelah.
Thank you, Lauren. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. I'm really delighted to present here today as part of the Pathy Fellowship. And I want to start off with sharing a story of a young boy who's in grade 3. He goes to school one day and he finds that his art teacher has laid out a bunch of clay on the tables. And immediately his heart, he jumps, he's excited. And he says, I know what I'm gonna make with this ball of clay. And so he spends the rest of his class making his favorite animal, the Canadian moose. And he's excited to share it with his classmates when one of his classmates comments saying, that's supposed to be a moose? That doesn't look anything like a moose. And suddenly his shoulders shrug and the light in his face dims. And that day he starts to doubt his creativity. And this young boy carries that from his childhood to his adult life, believing that he's not a creative person. And I'm telling you the story because I think many of you can probably relate to the fact of feeling excited about something and then being shut down and how sad that feels. And the reason I'm also saying this story is because women of color experience such comments on a daily basis. They hear microaggressions from a very young age. And this includes people saying things like, you're so pretty for a brown girl, or how are you so articulate for a Black woman? And it starts from a very young age where they say things like, your food smells. And that causes you to feel disconnected from your culture. Suddenly you don't want to take that to class anymore. And you know, as women of color further grow into their adulthoods, and although despite all these obstacles, they're resilient, they find that they're still questioned for their capabilities. As a lawyer and as a doctor, even in their own clinics, they have patients come in and ask, where's the doctor? Even though they are standing right there. And so this is a story, and to define a microaggression, these are daily verbal, behavioral, environmental comments that are either intentional or not, that communicate hostile, derogatory, and negative attitudes towards culturally marginalized groups. And there's the statistic from Mckenzie Report in 2018 that found that women, especially Black women, experience the greatest variety of microaggressions. In fact, 42% of Black women and 36% of Asian American women were asked to provide additional evidence of their competence, compared to 29% of white women and 16% of all men. And so this goes back to the story of that little boy, where I wonder how things would have been different for that little boy if instead his classmate would have said, oh, wow, that really looks like a moose, or you've done a really good job. You're really good at this. That would have sparked something in him to continue his creative journey and perhaps even become a sculptor one day, And so when I think of things like that, and I think of microaggressions that women of color face, it makes me sad to think of how many women of color live in this world facing these microaggressions, who feel that they're incapable of something that they are very capable of. And I also feel sad for this world for being robbed of the talent and innovation that is lost because this potential is unrealized. And it also makes me think of my niece, 3-year-old Huda, who is this fierce little girl. She is an absolute joy and does whatever she wants. She isn't afraid to climb things like that even I'm afraid to climb. And she just puts herself out there. And sometimes I worry about her because right now she's in an environment that her parents cultivate for her and allow her free spirit to run and be free. But I wonder how it would be when she goes out into the world and she will be asked those questions about her food smelling or how she speaks English so well, and questions which question her capabilities. And it also makes me think of women of color who have gone through those experiences, who have had to dim their inner child and their desires because they were told differently. And so what can be done now for those women? What can be done to spark that inner joy? And of course, we can't take back the words, we can't change time, but what we can do now is start by creating that environment where women of color realize their potential, where they feel that not only they feel that they belong, but they're also celebrated every day for who they are, what they bring to the table, their authenticity, their language, their culture, all of that combined. And so our mission at EmpowerM is to provide women of color with the space, with the resources and the tools to realize that potential. And you might be saying, there are resources out there. There are groups, mentorship groups. There are a lot of organizations doing things out there that provide tools, right, for mentorship. But let me tell you that there is something missing. Oftentimes, these spaces are not safe enough for women of color because they have these microaggressions present. They don't take into account these resources on how to be more culturally informed and can be sometimes more damaging. For example, there's mental health counselors who give advice without the cultural context, and that causes more damage to women than they would have hoped. And of course, lack of role models in our society, in our institutions, professors, teachers, in our media, in our politics, in our boardrooms. Decisions are being made on a daily basis for women of color without them in mind. And so what we do at Empowerm is different because we are really creating a space that is led by women of color for women of color. And we keep into account that every space that we create, we try to make it as safe as possible for these women from all walks of life. We work with women from diverse lived experiences to produce those culturally informed resources and curate those resources so that they are more meaningful. And most importantly, we connect them to people who look like them, to people who are in powerful positions so that they know that they can do it too. And so to tell you a little bit, my fellowship project this year was to develop and when I applied for the fellowship, it was to develop and produce a culturally holistically designed mentorship program for women of color to be paired with other women of color. And I was part of the initial 2020 cohort, which got moved because of COVID. But my team and I decided to move forward with it anyway. And we conducted or built a pilot. And so my fellowship this year focused more on improving the pilot, essentially. So I'll walk you through a little bit of our theory of change. I've made certain assumptions, but really what I want you to focus on here is that through our programming, through those mentorship, through those connections, the initial outputs that I want and the immediate outcomes are really for women of color to feel that sense of connectedness to their community, to feel motivated and ambitious about their future, and generate that sense of trust with themselves, with their community, and know that they are supported in that. And so I am going to walk you through a little bit of my journey. And this starts with us making some revisions, of course, because we had our pilot, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what that looked like. But we did have a lessons learned document that we compiled from a pilot that we then used to update our program design. And essentially we created more socials, workshops, and even our recruitment process. So it began with allowing women of color to apply to our program via any format that they wanted. So it wasn't just an application, because we know that that's a barrier to some people. Because not everybody has that experience with writing. And so we allowed them to apply via video, an audio, map, presentation, etc. And we got 65 women of color apply from across Canada. And here are some of the reasons why people applied. One woman explained that she felt, because she was one of the only people of color in her workplace, it was tough for her, and she really wanted a sense of belonging. Another mentee said that she was struggling to reconcile with all her social identities and wanted to be part of a holistic program where she could feel supported. Another wanted an older sister to give her advice. Another wanted to figure out how she could navigate those hard conversations in her workplace. Another wanted to understand and be mentored by a person who understood the reality of being a Black woman in a business world. Some mentors wanted to join because they wanted to pass on the wisdom that they learned through all the hardships. They didn't want other women of color to grow through the same challenges. And some joined because they wanted to fill their inner child. You know, they really wanted that mentor growing up and they didn't have it. And they said, hey, I'm going to be that person for somebody else. Another mentor joined because she was lucky enough to find that one person and she wanted to give back. And the stories like that continue. People had different reasons to join. But ultimately, our team had a very difficult decision to make because we needed to we could only take in 30 people into our program. And so we went through an interview process. We interviewed every applicant and looked at all their different social identities. So we looked at things like their race, we looked at religion, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, their upbringing, what industries they wanted to work in. And through this, we were able to connect people with similar lived experiences in a holistic way. So for example, we connected a South Asian Muslim woman with a chronic illness with another South Asian Muslim woman with a chronic illness who was in this particular industry. And sometimes it's not always easy to get the industry right, but we found that these lived experiences and personal social identity connections really added that additional meaning to this mentorship, because it's one thing to climb a ladder as just a woman, but it's another to climb a ladder as a Black woman, or to climb a ladder for a person with a disability who's also Black. And so the compounding impacts and the barriers really make it harder for you to, get mentored by somebody who doesn't really get it, because they don't understand or have lived similar challenges. And so ultimately, in the end, we actually ended up bringing 30 women of color together who call 18 places in this world, 18 countries, mind you, their home, and a combined 17 languages in this group across 7 provinces in Canada. And so we had this diverse group come together to share their cultures, to share who they are, and learn and grow from each other. And so this is really a glimpse of our onboarding process and what it looked like. We started off by mailing everybody a welcome package to really start to get them into our community and feel like they belong. And alongside this, we prepared a guidebook for all the mentors. It was 80 pages long, as well as a workbook for mentees that they can work through. So during the course of the program, the mentors and mentees had these one-on-one sessions, and they had this tool and resources that we curated for them to use during their sessions. And so that they could not only connect at a personal level, but also actually have some tangible goals at the end, and tangible meet their metrics essentially, or the outcomes that they wanted to get from the program. And so overall, during the course of the program, they had their one-on-one sessions, but they also had community meetups. We had 3 community meetups and 3 social nights, as well as 1 workshop on financial literacy. These sessions focused on different themes such as growth and the future for women of color. But most importantly, these spaces were there to validate that these microaggressions and barriers exist. And although our path to success is longer and harder as women of color, we can get there if we work together and lean on each other and grow our personal network and share those skills with each other. So going back to the journey, once women of color went through our community phase, we got them to fill out an end survey. And essentially what that was at our onboarding, we got everybody to fill out a questionnaire with quantitative and qualitative questions about where they are at that point at the start of their journey. And we got them to fill out the same form at the end and send them both those forms to help them see that they've progressed. And boy, can I say, or girl, can I say, I don't know. There was a lot of impact. So I'm going to share some things with you. One mentee said that she got more clarity around her goals. Another mentee who came into the program feeling lost and wanting to find a job ended up finding a job that she really loved. Another mentioned being more equipped to have difficult conversations at work with her managers, with her colleagues. Another mentioned that the program opened her to more possibilities and unpacking her goals. It really helped her change her perspective and allowed her to release constraints that she had on herself. In fact, we also had some mentees mention that they came in with a very concrete goal, but found through those conversations that what they really needed was rest, which is so underrated, And one mentee who was like super delighted by this experience, she got a paid public speaking gig that her mentor helped her get. And so this really shows so many concrete results for mentees who come into this program. But I want to also talk a little bit about the mentors who during those conversations mentioned how they got more out of this program than they could have ever expected. They came in here with certain whys, but they ended up also feeling more confident because they realized how resourceful they are when they were trying to find resources for their mentees, and how far they've come, how far that they've filled the inner child in them and gotten to this point. And through these mentor-mentee relationships, what really came out was that it wasn't really a mentor-mentee, typical mentor-mentee relationships, because it was really a kind of friendship that they developed that they're hoping to continue for the rest of their lives. And so I'm really happy that what came out of this program was women of color who felt that they could advocate for themselves, who are now more financially literate, who have more agency and feel that they have more control over their lives. And thinking of that, I think about my learnings from this fellowship. I've learned a lot during this course of these past 2 years, I should say. One, I've learned to be resourceful. Despite COVID, despite things moving differently, I was able to come together with my team and run a pilot and now use this opportunity to improve on what we had. And now we have 2 successful years. I was able to also during this process learn to trust my team, because I know, like, for me, I started this a long time ago, but it's always, because it's my baby, it's sometimes hard to see it, someone else take it over. And I feel like I can really trust my team to do and run this program. Also, through my interactions during this fellowship and with my cohort, with program coordinators, I learned to really understand my why. I learned to be a better storyteller. So I really want to take this time to thank this, first of all, the Pathy family and Adam for this opportunity, and Sarah and Jess for sparking my inner child and for constantly reminding me of my potential. I want to thank my cohort and my triad for inspiring me and keeping me motivated through this entire journey, and being my support system during this time, and like lifelong friendships, really. And so with that, I want to wrap up. And of course, actually, I also want to mention my family and friends. Of course, I can't do anything without them. And my team, without whom I wouldn't want to do this, but I also couldn't have done this, and who I wouldn't have, like my community, who, if it weren't for them, this wouldn't be there. So to wrap this up, I want to leave with one testimonial that mentor shared, or mentee shared, actually. It's a powerful feeling of validation, having someone else be able to articulate something that you are also feeling when it comes to navigating this world as a woman of color. And that's the beauty of EmpowerM, where shared experiences allow for such transformational growth. And watching the journey of so many, women of color, 30 women of color, in fact, 35, if you count me and my team, I just know the impact of this work is so worth it. And this work continues to drive me, continues to motivate me and inspire me. And I'm actually very happy to announce that we just landed a $255,000 grant to continue this work for another 3 years. And so my vision for EmpowerM is to continue building more culturally informed resources so that women of color have all the resources they need to succeed, to feel more competent and feel more confident and live out their true potential. So I'll leave you with one last question. When you see another woman of color experience a microaggression, will you choose to be silent or step in and spark that magic so that they can realize their potential? Thank you.
Thank you
I'll take
so
questions
much,
now.
Thank you very, very much. I'm Ben, everyone, and I'm going to moderate questions. So please feel free to drop any questions you have in the Facebook Live chat, or if you're joining us on Zoom, you can throw them in there. Um, what a beautiful initiative that you have spurred on for your community and this growing community, Nayaelah. And we're blessed to have gotten to hear about it. I got a quick question for you. This happened in the height of COVID, and so my understanding is that this was all going on over Zoom. When you were
Mm-hmm.
pairing up your mentors and mentees, was like geographic location a consideration? And what were some of the strengths of or possibilities on Zoom that maybe wouldn't have been possible in person? Are you thinking
Mm-hmm.
about in person next year? Yeah, how do you think
Yeah.
about
Well,
those
what
sorts
a
of
great
things?
question there, Ben. And in some ways, COVID for us, we and my team, we think about it as a blessing because I don't know if our program would have really existed in a way that it has and like spanned across the country in a way that it has if it wasn't for this virtual format.
Mm,
Of course, in terms of your initial question of did we consider that, I don't, I think we considered a lot of different variables. It wasn't just location. And so there were certainly, that was something that we gave thought to, but it wasn't our major factor of like, hey, this person's in Ottawa, let's like pair them with
mm,
someone only in Ottawa. I think we focused more on the lived experiences and what they
mm.
shared, and that's where the magic happened. And sometimes it ended up being people in the same city, and so they went out and they hung out. And in fact, we had a lot of pairs tell us that they met beyond those 5 sessions, and in fact they met like weekly and they text all the time. And so there's those things that even happen in the background that we're not even aware of. But I think this virtual format allowed us to reach people in even some remote cities where they might like not like be the only person of color in their school growing up, and they really need that this kind of space. And so I think that's kind of the beauty of it.
That is beautiful. Yeah, connecting through lived experience across space and building those networks and communities tighter. I'm going to share a few. You've got appreciations pouring in on all the chats, Nayaelah. So I'm going to share a few with you. From Eileen, she says, "Fantastic work, very inspiring, and she'd love to learn more from you about your mentor-mentee guidebook." And have you got a guidebook? Maybe I missed that. You're throwing
Yeah.
together some sort. Yeah.
So yeah, my team and I, we developed 80-page guidebook and an 80-page like workbook during this process. And it was basically just curating a bunch of information where we have specific prompts which allow mentors and mentees to get the relationship started off ground. Because sometimes it is hard. Of course, if you're meeting a stranger and you might need some help. And we structured all our workbook in a way where they correlated to each session. So the first session was very much to get to know each other and make those connections. And then following conversations moved from learning about each other's obstacles and stories and how those experiences and how that can work. And then the third session was more about an action plan. How can we work towards the goals that we want to achieve at the end of the program and follow through? So each of those sessions, we had prompts which allowed mentors and mentees to work through those questions if they were stuck, and allowed mentees to stay on track and send those type of agendas to their mentors ahead of time so they were aware of what's going to take place. So it was really there as like a tool. I know some mentors and mentees used it and loved it, and some didn't need it, and that's okay. So
Mm.
mhm.
And is that a
And thank you,
guidebook that
Eileen.
you Oh, pardon me for interrupting.
Sorry,
Go
I was
ahead.
just saying thank you, Eileen, for your kind words. I really appreciate it. And I love to chat with you. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week.
And how did it feel when you had the cohort-wide um, sort of groupings or meetings? Like, what was the energy when you brought all of these mentors and mentees together? You did that a few times this year, yeah?
Yeah. So we did that a total of 7 times. And wow, like, it's hard for me to express it in words. I think it's one of those things where you have to be there to know it. Have you ever like walked into a room, Ben, where it's just pumping with you? It's kind of, sometimes it's like that's the feeling I get with our fellowship, where there's like so much buzz and there's like this inspirational feeling in your heart, but then it's also warm and fuzzy and it's like a hug, but then there's this like, okay, like I can do this, like like all of that combined.
Yeah.
And then like, so mix all of that up and then think about like all these different cultures and people and like things that you can learn from. And yeah, so it's just this beautiful, beautiful feeling that you get in this room.
Shucks, that's incredible, Nayaelah. That is so cool that you've been able to offer that to these folks. Do you intend to have, or do you already have some sort of like graduate network for former mentors, mentees, so that they can,
Yeah, so we are in touch with some of our mentors from last year. In fact, many of them joined this year to be a mentor again. And so what we're hoping to do as we grow is really focus on that alumni network and connections so that we can continue to build this community where not only are cohorts learning from the cohort here, but they continuously are also learning from previous cohorts. And we're hoping to invite them in the space. So any future events and workshops we do that are not those community meetups types, we are hoping to also invite those alumni. So that's actually next thing on my team's list to work on and build that community further. Yeah.
I want to share some of Eileen's comments. She says that the guidebook sounds like a great relationship building tool, and that now that this community's being built, she figures you'll soon reach a tipping point where the alumni network really takes off. So
thank you. I really hope so. Appreciate that.
I've got a tough question for you, Nayaelah.
Oh, Ben.
So you've been in this coordinating role these past 2 years. Next year, do you intend to continue in that role? And would you consider taking on a mentee of your own?
Well, so it's funny that you asked me this today, because just yesterday I had a meeting with my team and we really talked about me kind of handing over the operations of the programming to them so that I could focus more on the strategic side and building further partnerships with organizations within the country. So I think for now, this year I'm hoping to work on that, but I feel like one day I will be ready to take on a mentee. I think right now I'm still happy to be mentored by many amazing women in my life.
What are future aspirations for Empower M? Got this question from Amanda.
Oh wow. Okay. Oh man, this is a loaded question because I feel like I could talk about the rest of the call. I really want to build this into something that, like our vision is to build a place where women of color have all the resources they need, and that means a lot because women of color are so diverse. And so I think what I'm thinking in the next year and next few years would be to build this directory for women of color where actually it really sparked because I was looking for a lawyer to see if I can register and power on the nonprofit. And I really wanted to work with the women of color lawyer. And it took me like a good chunk of time to find this incredible woman that I just met last week. And it made me think about how, even though women of color exist in those spaces, there's no easy way to find that. And so I'm really hoping to build that directory and then have other women of color access that, so that they can build those relationships sooner and quicker and have those mentors and mentees. So yeah, that's, I think, more immediately, but also potentially in the future, I want to expand to more cohorts. So we talked a little bit about in my team, how a cohort size. So with the pilot, we tried 12 pairs. Well, actually, no, we tried, I'm trying to remember now. Yeah, I think it was 12 pairs, and we tried 15 pairs here. And yeah, we feel like a good soft, like a sweet spot would be 12-ish or 13, like, so I think we won't want to go over that. So if you ever want to scale, we're hoping to either scale per cohort, which means we need another 5 team members to take on all the work that goes behind this process, right? So yeah, those are just some things that are on my mind. But like, I'm always learning from the community that we work with. Throughout our process, we collected feedback at each session that we did and incorporated that in our next session. So our first community meetup, whatever feedback we got from it, we tweaked our second meetup to match that, and really focused on changing as we go. And so I'm a big believer that, this is for women of color, by women of color, and the voice of the community and the members who are part of it really needs to be at the center of what we're trying to build here. So even though I have those ideas, it's going to be a matter of learning from the community as to what they actually need. Will this be a great idea? I don't know. So I'm just one woman of color and I only have one voice, but I think that's where I'll focus on, really building those connections, partnerships, and learning more and more and having a pulse on this community so we can provide that type of programming.
Phenomenal. Yeah, and you mentioned at the very beginning that your team was also quite thoughtful about the barriers to recruitment, the barriers to these processes. Are there any barriers that came up this year that you're thinking through, that you're working through, and maybe you could give us like a sort of a bit of insight into just some of the barriers that came up and how you folks worked through them, if anything comes to mind.
Yeah, so I think one thing that we're kind of still navigating through is with this virtual programming. Sometimes mentors and mentees are in different cities, and so the only way they meet is through Zoom or any sort of virtual platform. And with 2 years into the pandemic, over 2 years now, there is serious Zoom fatigue. And so I think we need to kind of think about more creatively, like how we can eliminate that or try to incorporate more of that. And I don't know if that means like moving forward, like location will be more seriously considered when we're matching so that people can meet in person and not have to do things online necessarily, or whether that means, part of our funding allows women of color to meet up in person. I don't know. Like, this is just like wild ideas, but I think that was definitely a barrier because everybody's tired and burnt out from so many reasons. And that included, Zoom fatigue. So I think that's a big barrier that is going to continue, and we'll need to try to figure out what some creative solutions are. And so if anyone in the audience has ideas, I'm happy to learn from everyone.
You take knowledge sharing wherever you go, Nayaelah. I've got a comment from Jess. She says, "Thank you so much for your presentation and for sharing your journey, Nayaelah. The impact of what you've created is so meaningful. What advice would you share to other folks doing similar work to create spaces of abundance for the community of women of color?"
Thank you, Jess. So I think my number one advice on this would just be work with women of color, not for them, so you're not doing something for them, but you're working with them. And when you're working with them, they're with you in that process. And through that, I think the magic just happens. I think where we go wrong is where we try to create something for another community without them at the table, really. And I think it's like a really simple thought if you think about it, but it happens so much in this world. It's just surprising to me. So yeah, that would be my advice. If you're working with any group, no matter what, and if they need to be there. That's it, period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I mean, so you head that, your team is by women of color, for women of color. A question from Courtney: can you talk a bit about the process of building your team and learning to allow and trust people to contribute to the mission, to the vision? Yeah, maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, wow, what a question, Courtney. And I'll be honest, like it hasn't been easy. It hasn't been easy because like I started EmpowerM a long time ago, but over the course of many years, I've had many different people join and leave, and of course, for various different reasons. And I think one thing I really learned, the one important thing that I learned from all of this was it's not really about the quantity, but it's so much more about the quality. So at one point, my team was 25 people. And, initially it was smaller. And then I was like, oh, you know what? If you have more people, we can do more and it'll be better. And then we ran into problems with accountability, like silos. There were so many more of these things. And then sooner I realized, okay, well, let's scale back. And then we went to 5 people. And now I've had this team, 5 people consistently. And actually I had a mentor from uOttawa who helped me with this process. He said, hey, why don't you ask them what you need? In the sense, so I specifically sent an email to all these 25 people. And it was really interesting because if you think about it, how do you get rid of 25 people who kind of join your journey? And yes, some of them are, it's a really tricky situation. And so I emailed them with saying, hey, of course, I was really happy to have them all. But I said, this is how many hours I need from you. And this is my vision. And this is what I'll need from you in terms of hours and in your passion. And for the people who emailed me back, they're the ones who are still here. They believed in this vision. They believed, and they've been with me, and they are the ones who helped me with this entire programming. And so it wasn't an easy path. There were many times we had people on and off, but I think ultimately it came to a point where people believed in you as much as you believed in this. And they believed in this vision as much as you. And yes, it just comes together. So it hasn't been an easy journey, but I am so grateful for the 4 women on my team who've been absolutely fantastic in believing and helping, build this program, without whom I don't think any of this would be there. So.
And yeah, that sounds, what a leap to go from 25 to 5, but it seems like, that quality over quantity was a good choice in the end.
Yeah.
And very elegant. Yeah.
Thanks to my mentor. I think, I think it's just I didn't think about how well the team would work with just 5, because now there's no silos. We communicate beautifully. And actually, I think we have a member of my team on the call, but we have this culture, I'm telling you, team culture, where we really focus more on, it's not so much okay, this is your title and this is your title. I think that's another thing that really helped the team. It wasn't giving people titles, but it was more functions. And the way we work with each other is we have a very democratic way of decision making. And that's another thing I'm kind of realizing, is that a lot of our organizations are structured in a way that is very capitalistic. It's the hierarchy, and we need to think differently about everything, and that includes our organizations and the way they're run. And so we take a very democratic process in our decision making, and we are all kind of involved in it, and that brings more agency for everybody. And I think it also produces better results for everyone, And so like we have this culture on our team where we really understand each other's capacities and take on and off. Like sometimes I worry, I'm like, oh my God, like this person's burnt out, but like they're leaving for like a month. And like now the work has to be done with 4 people. Like what's gonna be, like how are people gonna take it? Is there gonna be any resentment, any of those issues? And I actually had a one-on-one call with each member of my team this past 2 weeks. And I learned they're just absolutely like these empathetic groups who just care for one another in a way where they celebrated a person yesterday who said, hey, you know what? I need to take the summer off because I have to work on my thesis. And they said, thank you for taking time off. So, like that's the culture that we're building. And I think I really love that empower them. There's no animosity. There's no, resentment about that fact. So, yeah.
That is phenomenal. And it makes me think of, there's this Audre Lorde essay where she's talking about how there's so many ways to do things wrong in this kind of work. But when you're doing things the right way, you're taking time for these relationships, you're building a culture of care, it feels right. And it sounds like through the course of these past 2 years, things have felt right. Is that I imagine that's the case. Yeah, it's bubbly, joyful, buzzing.
Yeah. I mean,
that...
like I feel like for me, I'm still learning. I'm constantly learning, and there's definitely mistakes that I've made along the way since I started Empower M. And I think as long as I can stay open to that and like hear from my team, and there's days where I go, we have a team meeting and I say something. I think we have this culture now too, where they're not afraid to be like, Nayaelah, that's a stupid idea. Like, let's not, okay, they don't use the word stupid, but they're like, nah, we're not doing that. And, like, we just go ahead with it, and we really listen to each other, and like, we're not afraid to bring that constructive criticism so that it benefits everybody in the end. But yeah, I think I feel like there's very few examples out there for me to learn about culture, and I'm like reading up a lot on it, and like how can I build that culture and that safe space for my team so that they feel cared for and loved for and taken care of, so that they can produce and like also do the work and like bring that passion with me, right? I think it's like a hard balance, and yeah, like something I struggle with. Some days I really worry. I'm like, oh my God, like they can just leave and then this is it, like it's done, like I have those thoughts too. And so I think yeah, like there's been moments where I've said something and I'm like, wait, no, like I'll have to apologize for that, or like, so yeah, I definitely not perfect, definitely nowhere close to there, but I think as long as I can continue learning from my team and learning from examples that I think I can lean in, like, take from and learn from and pull those transformational leadership behaviors, I think it will be really good. I actually saw a workshop that this organization, I can't remember what it was doing, on transformational leadership, and it was like circular leadership. I don't fully know, like, I don't want to talk a lot about it as if I know anything about it, because I don't, but it just sparked my interest. And I was like, you know what, I should really look into taking that course, because I would really like to learn how we can create more circular organizations, which include everybody in the process, and how are we shifting the way we run our organizations, essentially. So yeah.
It sounds to me like you have strong accountability toward your team, and that culture is extending out towards mentors, mentees. And yeah, I hear you about not having a lot of role models for this, but it's you folks that are rewriting the script, and I imagine that you'll be exemplars for others going forward. I want to toss you one more question before we wrap up. This one's from Sarah. Thank you, Nayaelah. Beautiful presentation and some incredible stories of how Empower M has impacted both mentees and mentors. I'm always so inspired by you and what you and your team have created. Do you have any interests or plans to bring your work and this model into corporate settings? And you've got about 5 minutes.
Thanks. Thank you, Sarah. And Sarah's, are my mentor or coach during this process. And we've talked a lot about this. So I appreciate your question. And yeah, like that's something that we're kind of considering is like, how can we take this to the next level and build a more sustainable model for Empower that doesn't just rely on grants and funding by philanthropists, but also is embedded in our society the way it works, So how can we get corporations to create that space in their organizations and pay for these women to have this access to these resources? So those are things that we're looking at in different business models, but certainly my hope is to expand it into a corporate setting. And actually this year our end survey, we tweaked it a little bit to ask questions of that nature. We asked participants, are you more likely to join an organization that offers a program like this? And the answer was so much yes, are you more likely to stay in organizations who value, would you feel supported by organizations and employers who offer this type of programming? And so having answers to those questions now will allow me to, with Sarah's help, build a pitch deck that then I can, go to these corporations and say, hey, you know what, look, these are the stats from our program, and you should really consider this. Because yes, there are a lot of corporations that say, I was actually reading a statistic yesterday that said that there's especially now, there's all these organizations coming out and saying, hey, we're diverse and inclusive and blah, blah, blah. But I think there's only 13% that actually even have women of color on even management level and actually take things into consideration, which is a very low number. So there is definitely a gap, and there is space for us to work in that, in that industry. So there's big dreams, but keep dreaming, right? Because we'll get there.
Thank you so much, Nayaelah, for being generous with your learnings and with your stories, for sharing this experience with the rest of us and what you've learned along the way. It was an absolute pleasure and a joy to hear about it. A big thank you also to Jess and Lauren behind the scenes. And to you, audience members, thanks so much for joining us, and for your questions and affirmations toward Nayaelah. If you want to catch this, if you want to go back and review what she said, you can check out the Pathy Fellowship YouTube page where this recording will be posted. You can also join us later on today throughout this week, where other fellows from the Pathy Fellowship will be presenting their initiatives. Next up is Michaela at 3 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Atlantic, and she will be presenting on her work over the past year. You're all welcome to check that out on the Facebook Live or contact the fellowship for the Zoom details. Once again, thanks, Nayaelah. This was phenomenal.
Thank you.
Such a great way to spend the afternoon.
Oh. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate all the questions, and I had a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to Michaela's presentation and everybody, all the other fellows. So yeah, thank you, everyone.